You should know that. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anna Huizer. I'm the Vice President for Community Engagement at Internet 2, and I'm also lucky to be a member of the Program Committee for this year TNC. So we'd like to get started because we have a lot of great presentations, presenters actually, and we want to make sure that we leave time for discussion. So we will start. We have some changes from probably what's listed in the program. One of our presenters from SurfNet, the General Counsel for SurfNet, unfortunately got very sick and could not make the trip. And on her behalf, she's managed to get Erik Huizer to present for her. You won't be quite like Evelyn, but nowhere near. But so we've had that substitution, and also for the last portion of the presentation, we have also added Steve Cotter and Dan, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your last name. There we go. Dan Perry. Here we go, from Janet, and they will all join here at the panel at the end. So the title for this session is Going Global with the Cloud. And what we're going to try to accomplish today is to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that come when trying to deploy and provision cloud services at a global scale. A lot of us are working on that. We know that there are some essential ingredients that you need: federated identity management, security, scalability, infrastructure. You also need to think about your pricing business models and delivery mechanisms, and so on and on. So we'll start with a number of presentations from our friends from Surf, who will expand a little bit more on what's happening there, and then seg to the global scene and close with a panel at the end. So with that said, we're going to start with Frans from SurfNet.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for the introduction. I will start with this first half of the presentation, and I will hand the word next to Hans-Peter, for HP, I should say. And the title of our presentation is We Know Who Does What. And I'm not going to explain what we mean about it, and I hope that afterwards it will be clear. But I will explain about the subtitle, Shaping a Cloud Distribution Channel to Fill the Educational App Store. Because it's important to know what we refer to with cloud distribution channel. Well, in fact, it's quite easy when you start with this simple equation. You take your collaboration platform, for instance, our successful SurfConnect, or you can use your own, or build your own collaboration platform with the open source OpenConnect. And you find a partner like SurfMarket who is responsible for business agreements and procurements. And they will add in the business model, and there you have your service delivery platform. In fact, that's the platform taking care of the federated authentication, attribute-based authorization, and the national procurement and licensing. But that's not enough. We have been adding more and more components and blocks to this platform, like group management tools, a self-service dashboard, cloud service API, and the latest addition is end-user cloud store. Well, HP will talk about that and show what we mean about that later on, so I'm not going to tell too much about that. But this is the model which is working for Surf. SurfNet is taking care of the collaboration platform, and SurfMarket adds a business model to it. And in that way, we act as a broker between the cloud service providers on one side and the institutions on the other side. Well, it may be clear that something like this didn't happen overnight, and in fact we already started thinking about this process in 2009. Maybe you've seen this before, but it shows a little bit the history about SurfConnect. And nowadays we are adding these components, these add-ons which make it a cloud distribution channel. Well, let's look at some of today's trends. Planet of the apps. We see an increase of apps and also cloud services available for end users. That means, of course, that the usage of these apps and cloud services are very increasing, also in education. And we see also that means that consumers get more and more control, because consumers, they choose their own type of services. And they demand and they are used to an increase in speed and availability of those apps and cloud services. And you could say that an increase in consumer control means less control for the IT department. So we see a change in this role of the IT department. It used to be very much a situation where a central IT department or an NREN, so to say, is dictating the tools and services for its users. But that's not the case anymore. We are more in a new situation where the cloud is the driving force in what we say a choose your own everything. Choose your own device, choose your own tool, choose your own software, and choose your own cloud service. So we see that users become more and more choosers. And we have to adapt to this new challenge, the challenge of consumer choice. Meaning that let users choose between multiple cloud vendors and cloud service. This is what we call the multi-vendor approach. And maybe I'm using the same picture as I've been using last year in Maastricht. It's a typical Dutch thing, so I don't know if you recognize this. But it's hard to explain in English, but it's a walk-up self-service snack bar. You find those all about more than 70 or so in the Netherlands. And this is a good example that users always have been choosers. Because they are very fond of this concept, which is originating from the 1960s already, because it's easy to use, and it's easy, it's direct available, it's fast, it's convenient, and it's cheap, and you can buy this anytime. And one could say that the same demands the users have applies for cloud services. Cloud services as well must be easy to use, must be direct available, must be fast, must be convenient, cheap and available anytime. So if you look at the impact of the new trends, we see a changing role for IT departments, but also, of course, a changing role for NRENs. One of these new roles is our role as a cloud service broker. And Gartner describes the cloud service broker as a business model in which a company adds value to cloud services on behalf of consumers of those services. So the key thing here is add value. And adding value by means of an infrastructure is the thing and all the add-ons that I explained before is what we're talking about here. Well, I have a very short presentation. I would like to hand over the next part to HP. He is a team manager for channel management for Surf Market, and he will explain more about how to enable choice. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Frans. Thank you for that nice introduction. I don't have to do that anymore. Frans was just explaining about these changing roles of IT people at institutes, but also our own role is changing. And last year at Serve Market, we have been looking at our own role. We have been distributing software for more than 20 years to higher education in the Netherlands and making large agreements with software vendors. And then this cloud thing came along, and we were thinking, okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to make large agreements for higher education in the Netherlands for cloud vendors. But that's too simple. Cloud is not just a piece of software running somewhere else. It is changing the world. People have become choosers, as Frans just explained. So we drew up a new business canvas of what Serve Market's business should look like. So this drawing is a creative way of showing what our business canvas looks like in this new market. And I want to focus in on that 8 you see on the side. And the 8 is actually defining our customers in a new way. So the previous guy who would buy software from us would install that software and would be an IT technical type of person, and that would be our traditional customer base. And now we have defined the customers in 3 different categories. You have an orchestrating role, that is actually the old IT guy becoming an orchestrator and organizing already existing tools rather than building tools. We have a facilitating role, where people create groups or define what of educational tools you could use for a certain curriculum. And then obviously simply the user, the consumer, who is using those tools made available for him by somebody else, or can buy obviously his own tools. Now the IT people and the central organization of any university, they are obviously worried about privacy. So what we have done over the last period is defining how should we contract cloud. What should be in there in terms of privacy, and what should cloud providers comply to. We have what we call HO Normenkader. That's a legal framework under which we contract B2B contracts. And that is giving back a good degree of control to the institutes when moving into the cloud. What the users want, they just want to serve on. They just want to use it and don't worry about it. Other people have to worry about it. What users want as well is they want faster access, and I think that's key. We have been looking at cloud acquisition and setting up those contracts, and but end users are still nowhere close to pressing a button somewhere and actually start using it. I received an email the other day. A lecturer wanted to use a collaboration tool in the cloud with various universities, and sort of, yeah, okay, where do I start? What tool can I use? How do I connect it to Serve Connect? It's quite a complicated process, and end users don't know where to start. So we're still, actually, we have cloud, but we're still in that old-fashioned way that you have to wait for the IT department or the orchestrators to actually enable it. So this guy is Mr. Moore, and the law, Moore's law, but Moore is also like more choice. So a second thing I want to highlight from our new business canvas from Serve Market as a cloud service broker is what is now our value proposition to our customers. And the drawing is in Dutch anyway, so don't worry that you cannot read it. I'll just highlight some of the most important things. The little machine you see there is that same thing where the snacks came out, Frans showed you. And now services are coming out there, software, cloud, all the tools you want to use in education. And the most important values, the core values we try to implement now is, for the end user, is easy to use and choice. And then obviously for the other customers we defined, it's about security and privacy. They have other requirements actually. So how do we do this? First, we end up with a strange mix of personal services and business services. And our distribution channel we have set up actually shows both type of products. So we have what we call a B2B2C setup. So we can control the chain of how B2B services are actually delivered to the consumer, the consuming customer, as we defined him earlier. We look at the licenses database for a certain university in Serve Market. So that means they actually have the right to use the product. Then we look at Serve Connect. They can actually access the product. And then we can show it to the end user. And he has just to click the button and start using it. That's the general philosophy. Then if he still wants to buy a personal service or access a personal services, he can do that as well, obviously. And that is the lower cloud you see on the slide. To do that, we combine a number of existing tools. Serve Connect was already mentioned, and 2 distribution channels from Serve Market. That is the B2B channel Serve Market itself, and the brand Serve Spot, which is the B2C brand. So everybody on the one side of this picture can access the services on the other side of the picture, hopefully in a more easy manner than they currently can. That is our aim. So ServeSpot was already there for software, and we have introduced now a cloud store so people can also access the cloud. It's a brand new design, and we see that as a basis for a new store which will combine software and cloud, because cloud was the enabler for choice and pay-per-use and flexible access. But you see it across the board now. It's not only applicable to cloud. So I think that's an important thing that we stop differentiating cloud actually in that matter. It's just tools people use. Even the end user doesn't really care if it's a public cloud or a private cloud. Where does it come from? It's just a service. So we just have to throw it on one pile, basically. So it's a slick design and it's easy to use. People can log in, obviously, via Serve Connect. That's one of the top buttons, and we know where they're coming from. So if you log in from a certain university, we know which university you're from, and we know which services that university has activated, so we can show the right services to the right person. Then he can see what services he is using under a My Cloud button, and that could be sort of an application portal, a starting point where you can start using various services in the future. Since we're negotiating these deals I was talking about earlier, and most of those deals with the vendors, don't know if there's anyone in the room, they're special for education, and they don't want them to be lying out in the streets and everybody be able to read them on the web. So we show the products, but we don't show the price if you're not logged in. Once you're logged in, you can actually see the price of the service. And obviously it's €0 if somebody else already bought it for you. And then we show a little, how do you call it, circle, and showing that it's a campus license. And it will show you that they were made available by your institute. To actually do that, we have an example here, how we want to move on and actually get that quick access as well, so speed. Because if you need to do all sorts of manual stuff behind the scenes, people still don't have that speed. They have the ease of use and the ease via a portal, but with a provisioning engine, you can actually deliver on the spot. And we're experimenting now with Skim, and we hope that is a right future direction for provisioning of cloud services. So there's 2 different things actually going on. You become a named user within the service, and you have access via Serve Connect. That's 2 different paths to the same cloud service. The funny thing about the products to the advantage from Microsoft, it's actually a software download in this case, so it's not really a cloud even. But software comes out of the cloud, let's put it that way. Now the session name is Going Global, so we didn't forget that. And obviously this is aimed at the Dutch market. And our portals are in Dutch. But we realize that in the Netherlands, around 10% of the student population is not Dutch speaker. So we were thinking about creating an English website anyway. And if we have agreements which are applicable to perhaps the whole of Europe, and we have an English website, why wouldn't it work outside the Netherlands? On the other hand, the software we use behind the scene is SurfConnect, which is OpenConnect, everybody can use, and the portal is Magento, which is open source software, so everybody could start using that as well. So it's not rocket science to copy-paste this, I guess. OpenConnect, mentioned it already. So, punchline is, we want to make our customers happy and that they can surf on and use cloud services in an easy way. Thank you. Questions?
Questions, if there are any right now with these guys. And yes, please use the microphones.
Hi, Victoria Raul-Severe. I was wondering, it seems like there is a differentiation between cloud services and service providers. Is there a vision to include all service providers in the store? Thank you.
I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly. So you say there's a difference between service providers and cloud providers. I would say they are the same.
I agree, and that's why I was asking. There seems to be differentiation in the presentation. We would like to be treated the same.
Let's put it this way. Service provider, an SP, is the official name when you're connecting a cloud provider to a federation, and the identity provider is then the institute. So it's just different names for the same thing, basically, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. So would the service provider for Elsevier products appear in the store, in the surf market?
Yeah, that's the aim.
Thank you.
Right.
Very well. Well, thank you very much. And now we will switch to you, Erik.
Okay. I'm not going to use slides because I'm replacing Evelijn, who was going to present this. She prepared a full slide deck, but that's not my slide deck, so I'm doing my version of what she intended to talk about. And what we wanted to present is, if you're going global with the cloud, that's not just a technology problem, but you're faced with other problems too, and we like to zoom in on two of those: security and privacy. And we've been looking seriously at those over the last couple of years, and we worked on actually three things to address those problems. We worked on a security framework based on an audit program, and we analyzed. We did several studies to analyze the legal framework that we're faced with, and based on that, we worked on a privacy compliance working program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. First of all, the audit system that we developed within SURF, it's called SURF Audit. It's a collaborative audit tool that all of our institutions, that our customers can use. It's a sort of a benchmarking process where you can benchmark yourself as an institute. It's based on ISO standards, of course. And we added privacy as an issue to that audit. So the audit is not purely focused on security, but it, at the same time, addresses privacy issues, so you can check whether you've dealt with privacy issues in the correct way. In that way, we're trying to avoid that privacy is going to be considered as the opposite of security, which it sometimes is, and we try to make sure that that's absolutely not the case. Privacy. We were working already on trying to to analyze the legal framework we're working in way before Snowden, and actually a couple of months before Snowden, SurfNet published a report analyzing the implications of storing your data in cloud with cloud providers that were either US-based or had a major operation in the US, and the impact of the US Patriot Act on storing your data with such a cloud provider. That report was well received within our community, but went largely unnoticed by the rest of the world until 3 months after its publication. Snowden came up, and then our report skyrocketed in amount of downloads. Of course, Snowden has had an incredible amount of effect. One of the effects that it has is that 90% of the ICT decision makers are changing their cloud buying behavior. And that's an incredible effect. That's something you couldn't predict beforehand. And the effect that we see within our NREN, and I've been talking to other NRENs here in this week, and they see exactly the same effect, is that customers of us in SurfNet and Surf, they now say, well, storing our data with commercial cloud providers is all very well and cheap, but we have data that we don't want there. We want that data to be more secure by storing it inside Europe, or even more secure by storing it inside the Netherlands, or making it maximum secure by storing it on servers that are maintained, operated by Surf itself, because the universities argue we own Surf, so Surf cannot be bought by an American company or by another foreign company, and then all of a sudden have to adhere to non-European laws. There goes my mic. Still working? Yes. Let's see if I can put that back on. Yeah, I'm fine. One of the effects there is that our policy has changed from moving everything to the commercial cloud, all services for our customers. We are now building also cloud services within Surf itself. And at the same time, we are working on with our customers in privacy working groups to address the resulting privacy issues, both in the public cloud as well as in our private cloud. And that's what I want to conclude with is we're working in those privacy working groups, and we are getting towards solutions, but we feel we need to broaden that out. I don't know whether you're aware, but privacy has also been very large at the European Parliament agenda. There's a new privacy directive coming up. The first draft of that was published in 2012. There have been 3,000 and something amendments to that draft. I don't think there's any other directive ever in the European Union that has had so many amendments. It is now in this May going to the Council, and then will be voted on. And as soon as it's voted on, this turns into law. So it's not like sometimes you have the European regulations that countries have to turn into law. This goes into effect immediately all over Europe and applies to every EU country. That means we're all faced with the same privacy regulations in every country. So we are discussing this in the Netherlands, but I want to conclude this presentation by saying let's work together here. I see a need to work with all NRENs in Europe together to get to a common privacy approach, because we're all faced with the same rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. And I do recommend that people go to the program page and read the paper, actually, that Evelijn had put there, and the slides as well. It's a very good paper, very thought-provoking. So we will now go to the third part of the session, and I'm going to ask my colleagues here, do you all want to sit here or you start? You start. So we'll now move to truly global scale deployment. Can this happen?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shel Wagoner from Internet2. This is my colleague Steve Carter from Reusable. We're also joined by Dan Perry, who's in the front row, who's part of a group that came out of the Global NREN CEO Forum. For those of you that don't know details about that group, there was a presentation earlier this week, but basically it's a collaboration amongst the NREN CEOs to say, okay, when we have activities that extend beyond an individual NREN, how are we going to coordinate those in a lightweight fashion? And one of those projects was around services, knowing that the cloud was getting to be a bit more dramatic. So just we'll cover some of the background. We'll talk about what the lessons learned have been from our last year, and then what we're going to do going forward. So the initial group has been 8 NRENs, with Jeunink representing multiple countries, and then some large NRENs, small NRENs. We kind of got a mix of folks from Asia Pacific, the Americas, and Europe, with the goal of working together on the concept of scale at a global level for a cloud service. So we developed a charter. I won't read it to you, but basically it was outlined a year ago on how we were planning on working together to address this challenge, under the concept that all of us have very similar needs in the way we use these services. So if somebody's using Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Box or others, higher education, particularly the educational sector, has a lot of commonality in the way we would use cloud services. And is there something that we can do that would benefit the community and reduce costs to the provider for coordinating across multiple NRENs? So this little graphic is not unfamiliar to most of you. You've got individual institutions that are doing their agreements with cloud service providers. Then you've got, say, a small NREN trying to do deal, but they may be part of another organization. Then you've got an NREN that's working direct. Then you've got maybe a big university or college that thinks it's big enough, it'll just do it itself. So they're working directly with the provider. Then you've got another NREN that's doing it, but their agreements are only limited to whatever their domestic legislation is. And then you've got a very large NREN down here that doesn't want to participate with anybody else because, well, they're big enough that they'll just, they can have enough scale themselves. The names are not listed to protect the innocent. The reality is we are all of those, right? every one of those things represents all of us. So it's not about one group or another. It's just the reality of how fast cloud services are taking off. And you could populate individuals all over that map as well, as we heard from Surf, that individuals are doing a lot of it as well. So we set out with these 7 objectives to say, if we could do these things, right? If we could be structured so that each of our NRENs was a partner of choice, that we could have a scalable program to facilitate adoption. So, how could we cascade those benefits across? How can we assist the providers, right, in developing these models? Because candidly, we heard this from Surf as well, consuming the cloud is not buying software. It's not buying hardware. It's something different. And interestingly enough, every one of our countries is struggling with this as well, because is it professional services? Is it a product? Is it, and most of the laws are behind where this needs to be. So these were our 7 objectives that we developed a year ago when we started working together. And the way we decided to approach this was we would basically go work with providers and learn from, all right, the concept of those 7 things, let's use these individual services and have different ones take the lead. Internet 2 was doing some, and we had Surf doing some, and Janet and others. And we also had participants like Rayons or Cootie or others that didn't have deployed services yet, but wanted to be consuming those services as developed by this global consortium. So we tried to create, again, a mix of large and small, different regions, so that we could really get experience and learn by doing. And we have learned a lot. We have we developed this strategy where we would say, okay, let's have a directing REN for a provider. Given that one of us is going to have a close relationship with a provider where, for whatever reason, that established position will be where we'll funnel everything to. So we called that the directing REN concept. And basically what we said was, we will coordinate, one of the RENs will step forward for that provider on a service-by-service basis, and all the coordination with that provider, so the requirements, the needs, etc., would funnel through one NREN, who would then work with that provider, and then that way it would cascade back and go to all these other NRENs, and obviously their individual institutions and everybody behind them. So that was the original concept, rather than all of us trying to individually coordinate with a provider, but not actually get that coordination. We attempted this model. As you might expect, one of the challenges with it is, A, all of the providers are different. B, depending on who steps forward to be this NREN, their local or national restrictions impact what they're able to coordinate on. So what the Netherlands can do versus what the Canadians can do versus what Australian can do are different. So even with this concept, this NREN can't operate exactly the same. So that was a challenge. But we learned a lot from it. And so one of the things we said was, all right, well, maybe we need smaller scale. So let's try, late last year, we attempted this concept of, well, maybe it's not so much regional, but maybe there are subgroups that would be better off working together, based on legal system. Or based on, is it easier for the EU to work together because of EU privacy laws, or would it be easier we all hate the US privacy laws, so nobody wants to work in that. Most of my campuses say, can we put our data in Canada? That's a different issue. And since this is being streamed, I'd like to get back into the United States, so I apologize to whoever's watching. But it is... It is a question, what's the right scale here to get to global? Could we aggregate at smaller level and then still benefit from it? What's happened is, we've learned a lot. It's really hard because of the complexities going on. And here's just some of the findings. One of the ones that we really didn't think about to the degree that I when we started, that clearly has been present, is the providers themselves are very, very different. So even if we had a program that worked really well, some of the providers are so different from each other that it wouldn't work with them. So just as an example, legacy providers that didn't used to have cloud offerings that are moving into the cloud operate very, very differently than what you might think of as a cloud-native company, a company that just started in the cloud. They have different philosophies, different approaches. A global company that already has an established sales force and regions and incumbencies operates very different from a company that isn't global, that's just wants to be global. So these are some of the things that we've learned. And one of the big ones is just the development of a service with a provider. What are they going to deliver under what construct is very different than the provisioning or the procurement of that service. So if we're going to do something globally, trying to bundle these together, in other words, a common model for both what's going to be delivered and then how it's going to be delivered, adds a level of complexity. So we have to basically subdivide these things and approach them a little bit differently. Recently, what we did, we met last month face to face, and we reaffirmed our original objectives. The question was, are any of these wrong? Did we start out with a vision that we need to, redline? And we went through them, and in the end, we basically said, no, we still want to achieve this. This is really what we're trying to do. Our approach to do it is challenging, and we need to adjust it. So then we said, all right, so what is some success criteria that we just have to do, right? We said we really have to categorize the providers because we've learned that they're very different. we have to have some reusable requirements so that anybody locally who is acting is using some components that we know later will benefit us. Not an extensive, not a single contract, and just like you heard in the Janet presentation, there's criteria that they're putting in for the catalog. We need to get those common requirements so that they can be reusable regardless of jurisdiction or region. We need better transparent business models on how people are doing the provider to the NREN. So when a service provider is doing something with an NREN, and we need options and business models between NRENs. Because one of the things we don't want to do, you can imagine with 50 global NRENs, doing 50 one-off each time times 50 services, it's not going to scale. So we want to figure out, all right, which of the models and how are we going to use. We do need to figure out this question of globally aggregated volumes. So if we do something in the European Union and we do something in the Americas, how is that global? Since we're sharing all this, anyway, we know the researchers are sharing, all of this is being shared by the consumers. How are we going to globally aggregate those volumes and help the providers do that? It's not an easy question. And finally, we need to make sure that the procurement models are constantly being updated. We're clear which procurement model is required in that region. And that's different than a business model. Again, they're different things. And the procurement model, unfortunately, is one of those things that every country's procurement models and requirements are at a different stage of evolution as it relates to cloud. They were always different to start with. And now, as it relates to cloud, one day it'll be something, and then the next day, a new law has come into place and it's moved. And so these are, trying to design to a fixed point is not working. We weren't expecting it to, but the fact is, the cloud industry is moving so much faster than the regulatory and legislative environments that it lives in. As we saw from the Snowden incident, all of a sudden everybody's, privacy worries. We've been worried about privacy in our community for a long time, and yet, it took that kind of an event for people to really recognize that we had to change. So a couple of things that we're doing right now, and then I'll turn it over to Dan and Steve to take you through how we're going to do this and answer questions. Basically, this reusable requirements piece, everybody is developing those requirements on their own right now. Surf's got a great set, NordJunet has some, Internet2 has some, Janet has, everybody's got these things. We need to do a better job of having a synthesis of those into which ones can we agree on in common and which ones are going to be different. Because, they're evolving. So even if we were to work really hard and spend a year and get the perfect one, well, 3 weeks later we'd need to change it. So that's kind of a life cycle thing. How are we going to do that? We need to categorize all of our providers. And for lack of a more detailed definition, we basically agreed on 3 categories. We said there needs to be Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 providers. We'll probably flesh this out a little more and there'll be more detail. But the idea is the really big providers, whether they're cloud native or not, and the ones that are already global, we have to manage them very differently in how we engage them. It's just going to be a different kind of approach. Then you have Tier 2 providers where we're having a lot of success, good partnerships, in great part because it's been easier to be consistent or consolidate all of our thinking with a provider who is emerging or they're cloud native and they're not already global where they've got all these incumbencies, et cetera. We're able to coordinate with them a lot easier, so we want to focus our attention on the Tier 2 providers. We'll share information on the Tier 1s, we'll coordinate on Tier 1s, but it's going to be the Tier 2s where we're going to emphasize our efforts. And then the Tier 3 folks are really the ones that may someday be more than a regional offering. But right now, it's unlikely that they're going to be work outside of their region. They're really local, and that may mean they're really just at the individual university or a couple universities, not even at a national level. Or maybe they are at a national for that one NREN, but they really wouldn't go beyond that. So the way that would play out, right, is you'd end up with types of services. So these are, like trust and identity or infrastructure, software, voice and video, collaboration, different kinds of services. And then within that, you'd have a provider that would be Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And then what the thought is that we'd say, okay, for any Tier 1 provider in these categories, this is just a sample, right? So we're still working through the concepts. But if you got an infrastructure provider that's a Tier 1, that's global, that's going to be local or NREN. They'll just do that at the local level. Or in this case, even though they're Tier 1, we may decide that for video we want to have a global offering because we really want a single global fabric of video solutions. So if it's a big video provider, we still want them to deal globally. So we have to work through those and categorize those. And then we said, all right, for all the tier 2 providers, those are the ones we want, regardless of the type of service. And then again, in tier 3, maybe there's one that we say, yeah, nothing's really local. Even though it's a video, even though it's a local video offering, we really need to be thinking about how that would fit into this bigger, since we use those services across everybody so much. So that's really where we are, how we see the project working. The idea is, and kind of a vision is, a catalog of catalogs. You got all the providers. What are our common requirements? Each NREN or combination of NRENs would be populating this requirement, and then they develop their own catalog of services for their own community, and some aspect of those catalogs could populate a global catalog for reuse, right? So maybe Janet's catalog up here, and then you've got Arnet's catalog down here, and they're pulling things that they develop something that's global, and it gets put into the global context, and then it gets could be used somewhere else. So kind of a catalog of catalog options. But to get to this, we need to do the other things that we've talked about. So basically, it's hard. It's a lot of work. And there really isn't, candidly, there's not a lot of financial incentive for any of us to spend this amount of time at this stage. But if you look out long term, the horizon really is, if we could do things differently 20 years ago in the way our education institutions consume technology, would we? And I think the answer is pretty clearly yes. We've learned a lot from even the global NRENs working together. We can apply that to the cloud, and it's going to take a lot of work, but we really think it'll keep the money in the classrooms and the labs. It'll make it a lot easier for our community to be more dynamic in how we share these things, because we know right now the faculty members want, the students want, you want, at a click, access to these things. So that's really what we're after. So let me turn it over to Dan and to Steve. Steve, maybe you want to correct everything I said wrong from the team?
No, I think you covered it pretty comprehensively. The one thing that I would add is that it's not just for commercial cloud services. There are services that the NRENs and even some of our member institutions have that are being consumed globally, and we'd like to help facilitate that, use our infrastructure, make sure it is delivered effectively, and help take it globally, because we think that the entire community would benefit from that sort of thing.
Yeah, this is not, the intent here is, a lot of people ask, is this about just getting better price? But in many cases, our community are sharing things and we're not making any money. It's not a price issue, it's how would somebody work with somebody else easily without having to do, this point-to-point over and over and over. This is really a many-to-many architecture that we're trying to create for the cloud. And so I think our hope, in fact, is that there's more community services in there than just commercial, because there's a lot of value that could be added and exposed from, Reaffirmation may be able to provide a service that's already being used by the universities as it moves into the cloud. Think about all the open source software that's been written in the last 2 decades at each of our institutions. How are we going to write open services? How are we going to do that so that everybody can use them?
Yeah, in addition, as you said, it's not just about price, right? There are things that we can influence the vendors to develop into their products. In New Zealand, there's only 4.5 million total. We don't have a whole lot of sway and influence with, say, a Box or some of the other cloud providers. But as a community going to them saying, these are the list of things that we insist on, and we are all going to stick to this list, so you better listen to what we ask for and add these things into your product so that our community can better consume it. You get more of their attention when you do that.
Dan, do you want to add anything from the work thus far?
I'll make a couple of observations. Some of these things should be almost transactional if we can get the mechanisms right. And the efforts over the last year have taken us a long way to understanding what those mechanisms are going to be. Others, and the tiering recognises this, I should imagine a lot of the people in this room want to have some kind of relationship with the big providers like Microsoft, Amazon, all the rest. And these are routes into doing this. So whether your ambition is technical, business, cloud, network, whatever it is, these services and these relationships with the big organisations, how a lot of this will happen. So ultimately, there's a question. Shell says there's not a lot of money in some of this. Why do we do it? Well, presumably we all believe in NRENs, and we presumably all believe in the potential and what an NREN can actually bring to our customers, because that's the reason we exist. Getting good services and getting them delivered to NRENs is what I'm aiming for, and this is the mechanism for doing it.
So we thought we'd do this as a Q&A. So I think there's some microphones around, but these gentlemen are prepared to solve all your problems or answer your questions. Yeah.
I already have a microphone, so I absolutely agree with the last bit of remarks, and I wanted to add to that we inside Serve we've worked with our customers in creating what we call a higher education norm framework. So there's all kind of things in there regarding to what we expect from products in terms of the data safety, data privacy. That's already working towards, like you said, it's more than just the price. You want a whole framework of things. Now, if you adhere to that framework, we are happy to buy your products. If you don't, it's going to be more difficult.
Can I come in on that with an example for 365? That's exactly what we did. We spent time with the due diligence, the contracting structures, some great conversations where Microsoft actually realized how many contracts they had which overlapped, had different operational orders of precedence from legal orders of precedence. If we were looking at this as a cost-effective way of doing it, we wouldn't have done it. But actually, our customers want to be able to exist within that framework to know the services we're taking up, we are protected in taking up. And even if there are times where we can't do something about it, so there are some with Google that we weren't able to change the actual clauses. We were able to add clarity, because ultimately a decision on taking up a service is a risk decision for a sovereign institution. So we don't mandate any universities. Whether they take it up or not is their choice. What we can do is to work to put them in the best position for making that decision. So ultimately, they can go to Microsoft, they can go to Google, they can do it in-house, they can go to a local provider. We can give them a lot of information which helps to build that. And if we can aggregate that so that we don't get each university doing it, we can do it once for 170 universities and 450 colleges. There's a benefit. And we've done that one, and that one is going out, so hopefully it's being shared through Jeunink and through the rest. So we're trying to join this up as much as possible on it.
I'll add another thing I just thought of, there's a lot of value that NRENs can offer to the cloud service providers. I mean, we have a very high performance infrastructure that makes a lot of their cloud products perform better from the end user's experience. And so, that's another thing that we are trying to make sure that we're good at communicating to industry, is that we are offering a lot as well. We're not just consuming. There's a lot that we can do to make their products better, and so reminding them of that
we
is
need
important.
to do more. We're not good at that. We need to use our PR. Well, one of the things that we can add to them, I think, is we can offer them a test bed, a proof of concept at a large scale, and
early adopters.
We have above average intelligence users who can give feedback.
Maybe you do. No. Wait, this is streamed.
I think the concept of what value do we bring, both the NRENs and our community, to the providers. There's no cloud service provider out there that wouldn't love to have this whole market at any price, right? I mean, it's not about money. We are a market of interest for them. We are influencers. We are innovators, right? We are risk takers. There's a lot of benefit to engaging with our community, our students, our faculty, our staff. The more barriers there are between them and the service, it makes it hard to show the value to the provider, right? So, how do they get access to the, how do we do this? I mean, we're working with a provider right now, for example, who's very interested in doing some encryption and key management, and doing some tie-ins with software-defined networking. Right? They can't do that in a commercial, going to a commercial provider and saying, hey, can we do a test bed? Can we try this? And oh, by the way, can we do it on a global basis? And can we work across, they can do it, but nobody has the money. right? I mean, none of those small providers can pay these huge, but we want to work with them. So I do think we can do things with the providers, and they've told us. And there is significant benefit to us doing this across multiple.
Yes,
I mean, it's so much better than saying, well, in the Netherlands it's this, and in the U.S. it's that, and say we will help you bring together where where it's seamless, and where we need to, where things have to be different for the different regions.
Yeah, you saw what HP and Frans were presenting, where you have essentially this is an in-app word, but a sort of an app store where you have all the cloud services available. If every NREN has something like that, being in all those app stores must be of enormous value.
I believe you have to pay Apple every time you say that, but yes, we do need a...
Yeah, well...
Other questions?
I want it the other way around. I want Apple to pay us.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Questions, answers?
So I have a question for you guys. If you're trying to do something very ambitious at a global scale, and the participating NRENs are also working on their best practices and what they're going to do, so this effort is trying to coalesce those. So could you expand a little bit more on, what does an NREN need to bring to the table? What are the resources, the ingredients that they need? And I guess another question, maybe I know the answer to this one, but not everybody is, how does an NREN get to participate in the group?
Well, I'll start by saying that I think different NRENs bring different things. Like being in New Zealand, we're never going to have, well, I shouldn't say never, but we do not have currently any major cloud providers in country, and we have to consume it from Australia or the US. So, one of the things that, I talked about, early on in our participation in this is that we can be kind of that small NREN consumer that, is going to be having different needs and requirements than, US or the UK and others. And so we try to bring that perspective to the procurement process.
And otherwise, what the providers have said to us is they'll go through a commercial channel partner, or they'll go through, to get to New Zealand, it's unlikely they're going to set up shop in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Right? Without a lot of added costs. And for the most part, most of our community doesn't actually want to pay for sales and for...
Well, we don't need a middleman if our net is already directly peered with Amazon in Sydney, and our networks are peered, then why do we need a third party in between? But convincing them of that is not always easy.
I think the only thing which I'll add to that is I think the requirements will probably change over the next year and a half. As we get the mechanisms and actually work this through a few times, then I think there'll be opportunities for individual NRENs to join in as long as they're willing to commit the resources to be able to do it. So if we move to a model where we have a new provider and we're looking to engage with that provider, we may say that actually each NREN that wants to work with that will need to do requirements analysis in their own country to make sure that they really understand what their customers are looking for and feed that into it. So the Net Plus model is already very much take commitment from the sector, have some sponsoring organisations. If we're going to take that approach, which I believe is a really good approach, and try and use that in a more global approach, then they'll need to be able to bring that to it. So there's got to be something which is actually solid and tangible. But I think the requirements will change. I think the other bit which I'd note is I think we should recognise the good work which Jeunink has done over the past year and a half as well. And there's some really good things which are going through that. So I think we'll link that up more as well. So I think there'll be some kind of joining of this.
We also have, the group wasn't sure what we needed when we got started. It was pretty clear after a couple of months that most of the NRENs may not have been organized or structured or staffed to really think about, okay, so we're going to do this. What do we need to do? So pretty much everyone involved said, well, okay, we probably need to start thinking about what are the jobs that are going to be needed in order to be able to do this. So I think every one of us has agreed, to hire a program person to own this. Reusable went out and hired someone. Canary did. The Jeunink team restructured to do this. Internet2 has, so we all said, this isn't just about adding a job to an existing network engineer's day. or it's going to take a team for each of us locally or within our own NRENs to do it. And so that was one of the things we ended up saying to each other. It's really a requirement. If you're going to participate, you can't do it part-time with somebody who has another job. They really actually, you're going to need somebody in your country who's going to really be aware and know this. And I think we've all...
It's because it's been a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, yeah. It's not the same as, provisioning circuits and things we've gotten really good at over time. There's a whole... Not only is it not the same, there's a whole bunch of unknowns that the provider doesn't know either. It's not as if there's a cookbook out there. We're having to kind of build it as we go. Other questions?
No
please.
Question, just a remark.
Yes. Hi, can you, so that the folks online can hear, can you, if it's a good remark, then wait for the mic, otherwise.
It is a good remark. I'm working for Serve Market. I'll be joining, and hopefully I will provide some useful input on this project as well. So I'm looking forward to it, and I think it is actually a great challenge it's almost JFK-like. It's hard to do, and let's do it. Just aim to go to the moon, and this way I think we can achieve things which are going beyond our imagination. So go for it.
Yeah, we all knew it was going to be hard. I think that we probably were overly ambitious in that we decided to start with a few number of providers and assumed that was the small scope that was going to get us there. And it turned out it wasn't the number of providers that were the problem. It's all the layers of things that we have to do that are outside the providers that we needed to get some more foundation on.
True, but actually, don't throw away what you've already there in your NRENs, the particular NRENs. Everything you do on a local level, that knowledge can be, in a way, reused in this global setting.
Mm-hmm. Speed's also a problem right now for us. We have to move fast or faster to keep up. I mean, we started with a provider who, somebody gets acquired, and or they change their business model in the middle of working with us, right? Because everybody's a little unstable right now. The industry's unstable. I mean, it's a good thing, right? Out of chaos comes some great opportunity, but it is a wee bit chaotic out there.
Yeah, actually, one of the observations I made as, let's say, an outsider and now coming into this project is we need also to have, let's say, I would call it business intelligence, our contact persons at the other side of the service providers. From nation to nation, they are different. Sometimes they are the same. We are talking with them. They're changing their jobs, etc. We have to have an orchestrated effort to see what's going on and to see how they are moving, because some of them are becoming ambassadors in other companies. I can show you that Box is sometimes being our ambassador when I talk with another US service provider who doesn't understand the EU legislation in all the context. So let's use this. Okay.
I'm just laughing because I have to tell you, the number of times we've introduced people to each other that work for the same company as we're trying to do this, Vice President A, meet Vice President B, and you're like, I don't know why we're having to do that, but that's kind of what's going on, because it's not just globally across the regions, it's within the company's different product units. It's really a challenge. Is there a question over there? My eyesight is not what it needs to be. Oh, he has one down here.
So I wonder, you've talked a lot so far about some of the business challenges, contracts challenges, political, regional challenges. Have any technical challenges come up, or are existing NREN networks and interconnects, can we do cloud from a technical standpoint globally, or are there still some technical challenges that the group is having to work through as well?
I think it depends how you define technical, but if I was to rate the priority of worry, technical wouldn't be my top worry. Everything else around it, you've heard the description there. Can you get the contracts right? Can you get the business to actually talk? Will procurement work? Will this work in more than one area? Will the people still be there in 6 months, or have they just been bought by someone else, in which case you have to go through the whole thing again? Technical, it's often a revelation. We've got these fantastic networks, and most of the vendors have no idea about this. They don't have a business model that's set up to do with it, so they say, well, how much are you going to charge us for bandwidth? We're not, and we expect you to drop your bandwidth as well. Oh my God, how do we do that? So from that side, technical isn't a problem. I think there are some guiding principles which have issues for them. So federated identity is obviously a key aim that we hold as one of the principles. That's in almost everyone's approach to this. That's actually quite difficult. And if your first conversation is with a salesman and you say, right, we're going to do this, but we require you to have federated identity on your products, you then spend half an hour explaining what federated identity is. That person then goes away confused. A different salesman appears the next week and you have the same conversation again. So is that a technical problem or is that a person problem? It's messy.
Steve, what about the latency issues? We often hear, this move to the cloud. For someone that's on the warm side of the earth, what's the...
I would say it's actually been a good thing for us in New Zealand because, with being so far away and having long latencies, their desire to deploy, to access cloud services is actually forcing them to upgrade their campus networks to a level that it minimizes packet loss, because that has a really adverse effect on latency and throughput and stuff like that. So from our perspective, it's actually been almost a godsend. That said, it also means that we had to look at getting more capacity internationally, because bigger uptake, which they were handling over commodity connections, and now some of them are going over our peer connections. Is also, but that's something we know how to do. It's just having to keep up with the pace of the growth of the traffic.
Yeah, I'd also mention that in working with these, one of the things we have to do globally in this coordination is the providers aren't standing still, so you'll spend a lot of time getting something architected to work, and then they're like, oh, well, we just opened a data center last week in, Shanghai or Singapore or wherever it is. I'm like, well, why the hell didn't you talk to us about that 3 months ago when we were trying to figure out how to do the accelerate, So you've got to have these plans done on a global basis so we're all sharing that information, because otherwise you're spending a lot of money and time with a provider who inside the provider don't know what they're doing. This is just, and they're really all moving very quickly. Lots of the small providers, let's say, provider A is now using provider B who uses provider C, right? So you've got this cloud stack going on of software is running on a platform provider who's got a data center in one region, and then they all of a sudden start working. It's just a constant moving landscape, and so you can imagine how much duplication of effort there's going to be if we don't figure out how to solve this problem over time. If we really end up in a world of, a university's ecosystem is, let's say, 1,000 services, and over 50% of them are coming from somewhere else.
Can I add something to it? I don't think there is a technical challenge. It's actually technical potential and opportunity it can provide with working with the NRENs in higher education globally. And we shouldn't only focus on the network aspects. Actually, we'd better look at, let's say, higher level of service and architecture on application integration, information dissemination, open data, and linked data, all these things, because if you look at a learning management system, it will communicate with other applications, cloud applications. It's not about the network, it's about what information is flowing through and being used. And if we can challenge and provide a gateway to business potential to these cloud service providers by choosing the right standards and going web SSO, non-web SSO, LMS, QTI, all these things, then they know they get value for their investment.
Well, we'll get there. You think about it, we've got the global network architecture, the GNA work that's going on with some of the global NRENs. We've got, there's a number of these building blocks. The identity management frameworks are, what are we going to agree to, some commonalities, again, all to get to scale. So we're one of the few entities that can do this, working together. Right, most corporations don't have the same. Even if they're a global corporation, they're defining things in a much narrower context. just for them, whereas we're talking about for a community. So the providers want to work with us, and I think we're going to get there. There's no question. My piece of advice to everybody in the room that's working either as a provider or working with providers, et cetera, it's always remember the local salesperson objective is to make you successful, not to solve a problem for the rest of their company, right? And that means they want to sell to you, and it's really hard for them to change things back in their own companies. We're the ones that have to help them change their companies. So they need us to partner with them. I feel for some of these folks because we've seen it over and over again where they don't know how to make these changes inside because it's just a different paradigm. How are we doing on time, Anna? I think, yep, back here.
I was wondering, have you been considering automating certain standard tasks that you need to do in order to link up cloud providers to your community? We've been looking into this and we came to the conclusion, look, the law says that we have to do a risk assessment, we have to make data handling agreements for each and every one that we contract with. If you do that times 50 institutions, that's a considerable investment, and usually all the individual questions are exactly the same. So that sounds like an automation possibility. And if you're looking into that, that would be quite interesting because then we don't have to develop that, which would be beneficial for us.
It fits into the model of what we're trying to do. I think it's a higher level function. I mean, we're kind of in a Maslow hierarchy issue of do we have all that would go into the common requirements that we would be listing from the multiple catalogs, and are we going to adopt SCIM? How are we going to do provisioning and deprovisioning? The big issue of automated provisioning and deprovisioning, as an example, there are steps that we can take up to a certain point that would be very common. And then the issue of, for example, attribute release by individuals then gets into legislative issue. Can somebody do this or do they need the institution to do it? So I think we've been caught up in just the size of what needs to be done, and now the first year has really taught us how to tease this out into a smaller set of issues. So I'm not sure that it's the answer you want to hear, that we don't have anything right now, but we are going to have to. So we would love to have, if you're working on it, we'd love to have you participate so we can start sharing that. That's why the other subgroups in the CEO forum, identity, network architecture, those are all going to that same kind of piece. I don't know, Steve, do you want to add or?
I think we've spent the last year and a half going from kind of artisan craftsman into getting close to a kind of production process type mentality. If we can get that, then we can get standardization. When we can get standardization, then we can look at automation. So I don't think we're there yet, but go for it and we'll learn from you.
My question is to ServConnect's team. Based on your previous answer of exposing service providers on the marketplace, I recall that you mentioned that you will be somewhat pre-authorizing the services available for specific user based on their origin ATP. Do you think it is a little bit of moving authorization away from SP? And would you be open to collaborate on that? Because obviously your solution isn't benefiting users, and we would like to ensure that we can work with that.
If my microphone is on. There are a couple of things there. Normally, there was a session earlier by Bob Huizer also on authorization into a service provider. Different ways of doing that. The most common way is that you have a sort of super user in the cloud which can administer the users. So the federation just passes on people, and if you have an account, you can actually access the service. And we have been experimenting with other ways of letting people into the service with IDP-centric attributes, entitlement for a certain service, or doing a group-based access with a separate group entitlement management platform. And we're still experimenting with that, and it perhaps adds on to the requirements we might have for service providers, is that they can actually work with entitlement attributes to give people access, because most of them don't have a clue what you're talking about. We're already happy if they understand what the word SAML means, let alone entitlement attributes. Yeah, so I think that's on the road, but it's still in development.
Would you be open for collaboration?
Sure.
Can the moderator ask 2 questions? Isn't that?
Actually, this may be in the minds of other people. So, if your constituents who pays the bill, say if university, or in this case, let's say a very influential, or maybe a demanding faculty member, or even say a student, your regular student, how can they influence the outcomes out of this group? Is this just, taking this to the NREN but do they play a role into helping direct the outcomes out of this group and effort?
I think the answer is yes. I think it varies from country to country. I know some of the NRENs, like in the U.S., Internet2 has regional networks in between them and their end users, and so they have to take a different set of considerations into it, and their regionals are the ones that work directly and get that direct feedback. In New Zealand, we've approached some of the universities from their procurement teams and their IT directors and even some of their faculty on the sort of things that they want. We connect research institutes. They have different needs as well. I think we all have a responsibility to kind of gather that information and bring it up to the broader global effort.
I'll give you an example from the UK. For the initial Office 365 agreement with Microsoft, we worked with about 3 or 4 different universities. So any student could talk to their university and through that to us. When that was then signed, sealed, done, we heard of a university that had gone to Microsoft independently, and Microsoft guided them to come and talk to us. So what we're trying to do is let as many people have a voice as possible. Ideally, we want that to go through the appropriate channels in the universities, but we will try and take that kind of thing into account.
I think I would say that the Snowden event has been very helpful in that it raised awareness for lots of individual users that when they use a service, it may not be coming from the jurisdiction that they think it is, right? So everybody with their apps and their individual things and the data, one of the things that happened is we had CIOs that at our campuses that were contacted by their community saying, hey, this app that we want to use that we already signed up for 100 licenses for and just never told you about? Can you help us figure out whether it's okay to use this now? Because they all went out and did it anyway, and then they realized that maybe there was more to the story than they knew. If you ask the average user, do they know that the bit.ly URL shortening service comes from Libya? They don't even know what you're talking about, So a lot of folks aren't educated about just how easy it is. They understand now it's taken, 20 years to figure out what a phishing email is and not to automatically open an attachment. So we've made it that far. But now with all the websites and the cloning and I just think we're in a world where you need a mechanism to have this stuff roll up to a local owner who then has a close relationship with the NRENs so that you're constantly building materials to help those CIOs be successful because there's everybody can go around anybody now. Right, we all joke about the fact that the IT departments are always the one that get they're the bottleneck, right? But it's the same for us. You don't like an app, you don't contact the app writer or owner and tell them that it's buggy or that it didn't work or anything. Delete, new app, done. You're just moving on, and so we need to find mechanisms that do that. And I would say at Internet2, our biggest issue is we don't pick any services. So our mechanism is we just don't pick a service to add to the catalog. We don't do it. The campuses have to bring them to us, And then we do the coordination, and we bring multiple campuses together, et cetera. But we don't pick any services for the campuses to use, even though there's a lot of them we know they need engagement with. But we just don't do it for that. You know, the reason is we want it to be coming from that. We want to get them into the habit of saying, this is what I want, instead of just going around all the time. So that's kind of how we're trying to do it. But to my point earlier, we didn't have the staff to do that. We had to hire people. So it's not cheap.
Any final questions? Yes, sir. Well, whoever came up with that quote, I think, hit the nail. I mean, I know it's not been a trivial amount of work from the NRENs involved, and I love it. If it was easy, we wouldn't be here, right? So, in any case, if we could just a round of applause for all our presenters. And just some final announcements. See you at the party tonight. Please make sure you take a look at the bus schedule. And our dear friend Jeunink just sent an email where I think she put her phone number. There is a phone number there in case anybody has any problems or questions or concerns. So see you then. And